Hey folks, this is Ian again. This is episode 11 of Creating Creative Chaos, and I'll be doing chapter 5 of The Reluctant Regent today. We'll talk a little bit about neck tattoos because they kind of play a part in the chapter today, but I'll do most of that at the end. Why I think they're an interesting cultural phenomenon. So let me go ahead and share my screen here and we will get into it. There we go. So this is chapter 5, the start of the Great Northern Miscommunication. And as you remember from our last one, this is when they found out that the guy that was in charge had actually been paying off the Surtrani raiders, which were basically Viking raider analogs for this story. So they just found it out. Kells is, of course, very excited, and Minrir is getting even more depressed because he's going to have to break out his broadsword again. So let's go ahead and get started with it right now. Chapter 5, the start of the Great Northern Miscommunication. So we had a raider problem. Let me go ahead and just bounce this up a bit. So we had a raider problem. Minder and I formed up the garrison and began interrogating them on what they knew about Sir Derren's arrangement. At first, the only thing that they could say was how shocked, nay, appalled they were that the late Sir Derren had engaged in such underhandedness. Now, Minder and I shared a look of disbelief. The Surtrani were known for a lot of things, mostly involving hooliganism in one form or another, but the one thing they manifestly were not known for was leaving undefended, highly flammable towns alone, unless, of course, somebody was making it worth their while. So we listened to these loud denunciations of the late Sir Derren for a few minutes and then tried to get them to focus on useful information. Things like how many raiders usually came, how large this Claiborne fellow was, and I thought that was particularly important, and where, if push came to shove, Derren had stored his bales of wool in case we needed to pay the Surtrani off again. Eventually, we ascertained that the Surtrani usually came in one longship, which was good news. Claiborne was a giant of a man, which was bad news, and nobody had any idea where the tribute payment was, which was probably the worst news possible. Even Kells was unable to shake the soldiers from their statements, so we were eventually forced to conclude that they were probably telling the truth. I had the garrison spend the rest of the day combing through the fortress looking for the tribute payment while I tried to formulate a plan. I hadn't gotten past the try not to die phase before I finally fell asleep, only to be awoken at dawn the next day with cries of "Sail ho!" from the sentinels on the wall. Cursing, I struggled into my well-worn gambeson, snatched up my crossbow, and raced into the courtyard. Minrir, already in his full plate with reasoned response strapped to his back, was waiting for me, and Kells soon joined us, dressed in a yellow homespun dress and white linen apron embroidered with bees pollinating roses. So it was a very domestic-looking outfit. As I shouted to the garrison to arm themselves and secure the walls, Moose trotted up and impatiently nudged me with his blocky head. He clearly sensed impending action, and that, more than anything else, alarmed me. I mounted him and shouted to the soldiers as they swarmed around the courtyard, strapping on weapons and struggling into their armor. "Stay in the fortress, but be ready to charge to my aid if you see them attacking me," I yelled. "We're going to go down to the docks to reason with this Claiborne fellow and see if we can avoid bloodshed. Are you with me?" "We are, sir," they all shouted enthusiastically under Kell's benevolent gaze. "We're with you till death." "Well, hopefully it won't come to that," I muttered under my breath as my little band left the dubious safety of the fort and trotted down to the harbor. What I saw when I got there was hardly encouraging. A low, lean, black-hulled longship with blood-red sails was pulling up to the main pier, full to the rails with tattooed Surtrani raiders clad in mail and fur, wielding a wickedly spiked assortment of swords, axes, and spears. There were at least 50 of them, and none of them looked like they were in a particularly friendly mood. The citizens of Land's Rebuke were largely absent from the streets, although I noticed Thera standing in the doorway of her inn, frying pan in hand. As the longship tied up, a heavily tattooed man, only slightly smaller than Minrir, jumped lightly onto the dock. I could already tell he was the sort who acted before thinking, which didn't bode well for us coming to a peaceful understanding. But I had to try. It was my job, after all. With a heavy sigh, I dismounted and turned to my companions. Wait here and let me go try to reason with him. Minrir looked at me dubiously, then shrugged, while Kel simply sat down on a rock and began humming tunelessly as she began braiding her long hair. Moose gave me his usual inscrutable moosish glare and began cropping grass. I took a deep breath to calm myself, straightened my shoulders, and walked down to meet the Surtrani. "Ho there," I said as I approached. "Would you by chance be Claiborne?" "I am," the mail-clad giant rumbled. "Who would you be? Where's Derren? And where's the wool?" He hefted a double-bladed axe and glared around the silent docks. I nervously cleared my throat. "Well, it's the funniest thing." I gave a small laugh. Claiborne just stared blankly at me, and I noticed that he had "there is no I in team, but there is meat" tattooed across his throat. It was distracting, and I wondered what exactly it was supposed to mean, and why he thought putting it on his neck of all places was a good idea. Is he threatening to eat his own men? I thought bemusedly. Well, that doesn't seem very inspirational at all. I shook my head and refocused myself on the problem at hand. Okay, I'm Lord Caldor, currently administering the province of Sheepland, and Darren, well, there's no way to put this politely, so I'll just say it. We have no idea where Darren currently is. I glared over my shoulder at Moose, who glared right back. And we also can't seem to find the wool he set aside for you. He apparently didn't think to tell anyone where he'd hidden it before he vanished. Isn't that just the craziest? I laughed nervously. Claiborne growled, and his men began silently filing off the long ship behind him, hefting their weapons menacingly and glaring at me. Well, this was clearly going well. I shuffled backwards a few steps to get nearer to the shore. So I thought that in light of the current circumstances, we could possibly renegotiate the deal and maybe clarify what exactly we're getting in return for our payments. I smiled winningly at him, then prudently backed up a little more. "What you get, little man," he roared, "is not strung up by your scrawny guts and your head mounted on the prow of my ship. Now where in the watery hells is my tribute?" I paused, parsing his offer for a moment. He seemed inordinately upset about not getting something he hadn't worked for in the first place, and I really wasn't seeing what we got out of this deal except for, maybe them leaving, which, given how surly they looked, might even be worth it. I don't know. I tried again. "Listen, let's be reasonable here." A low growl rumbled through the mass Surtrani. That was obviously the wrong thing to say with this crowd. "Okay, then, let's not be reasonable," I said. I was starting to get irritated, what with all the menacing weapon waving and strangely incoherent neck tattoos I was having to deal with. I clearly don't have the wool, and I'm just as clearly not interested in getting strung up by anything, much less my intestines. And being beheaded, well, that's right out. We've only just met and you already want to chop my head off for not giving you something that you've never apparently had to work for that I don't even have? This makes no sense. What's wrong with you? Now stop being silly and let's discuss this like rational human beings." Claiborne's eyes bulged and his face reddened dangerously. "Oh, you foolish, foolish little man," he said in a quiet, menacing voice. "I can't tell you how much I've wanted this arrangement to fall apart, just so I could start burning and beheading things. I thank you for that, and I will repay you by starting with you." He began walking slowly towards me, his iron-shod boots ringing on the dock, swinging his axe from side to side. Now, strangely, this didn't frighten me as much as it should have, because I was outraged by the fact that he had just admitted that he didn't even want the wool, but took it anyway. Well, that even makes less sense. Why didn't you just tell Darren that rather than stealing all of our precious wool for all these years? I shouted as I continued to back away from him. You literally came up with a plan that made all parties as miserable as possible. What sort of idiot are you? I'm gonna rip your eyes out and kill you with them, he snarled. Then I'm gonna. He never got the chance to finish his wildly improbable threat because at that very moment, Kel skipped by me and put her hand on his mailed chest, stopping him about halfway down the pier. You don't make much sense, she told him seriously as she looked up at him. And I don't like your tattoos. Then she kicked him squarely in the fork of his legs. Claiborne's eyes crossed and he bent over, dropping his oversized axe to the oaken planking with a clatter. Kells smiled sweetly at him for a moment, then put her palm on his forehead and gently pushed him over the side. The raider hit the cold water with a splash and quickly sank, pulled under by the weight of his mail. The docks were silent for a moment, the only sound the bubbles rising from where the soon-to-be late Claiborne was attempting to breathe water. I frowned thoughtfully at the rising bubbles for a moment, then raised my eyes to the shocked Surtrani mob at the end of the pier. So, I have a question. You lot are all seaborne raiders, right? You travel around by ship, and I would think spend a good deal of time on or near water, fighting and burning and such. Am I correct? The Surtrani looked up from where their leader had vanished, and a few hesitantly nodded. Then why, I continued, don't you wear lighter armor? Something that doesn't cause you to sink like a stone if you happen to fall overboard. I gestured at the slowly popping bubbles. I think that leather would be a better choice here than mail, given the tragedy we're currently witnessing. They looked at each other with confusion and started muttering amongst themselves. It looks nice and fearsome, one ventured. Aye, and the ladies back home love it, another one agreed. Why, my wife's sister. Silence! A scarred, bald, one-eyed reaver shrieked. These dogs just killed Claiborne, gut them, and burn the town. After a moment of hesitation, the Surtrani roared and surged towards Kells and I, their weapons glinting evilly. She laughed with delight and skipped down the dock to meet them. She gracefully slipped between two charging warriors, tripping one and sending him in the water to join his chieftain. Then she ducked under a wildly swung axe, which its wielder buried in the face of yet another shouting Surtrani, and then she disappeared into the flailing mob, breaking bones, dodging blows from the now fully enraged raiders, and regularly shoving them over the side to let the cold waters of the bay finish them off. It was beautiful. It was also terrifying. Unfortunately, Surtrani, who were currently not in the process of being shoved to a watery death, soon noticed me standing on the shore, gaping like a fool at the carnage. They charged with shrieks of rage, and I had just enough time to belatedly realize I should probably have retreated even more when Minrir appeared beside me. I guess this means they're not seeing reason? He asked as he unsheathed a reasoned response. Yes, you could say that, I replied, staring at the tattooed mob surging towards us. They appear to have taken offenses to Kells's impromptu swimming lessons, and honestly, my comments on their chosen raiding attire might have been ill-advised and ill-timed. Sorry. You should know better than to criticize a raider's armor, especially after you've just drowned their leader, he chided. Next thing you know, you'll probably be taking offense to their tattoos or something equally ridiculous. I grinned at him. Well, now that you mention it. Minrir sighed heavily and gave me a look of disappointment. Then he strode forward to meet the Surtrani mob. He swung a reasoned response in wide, arcing blows which sheared through armor, flesh, and bone like paper. One swing cut a yelling raider's head from his shoulders, and then the backswing crunched into an armored torso, parting the mail and knocking that hapless Surtrani into the water. He followed through with an overhand blow to a charging raider who was wielding two axes, and that split the man's head through his iron helm clear to his chin. As he was pulling his broadsword clear, he casually backhanded yet another Surtrani with his armored fist, shattering her face. Minrir continued casually backhanded yet another Surtrani with his armored fist, shattering his face. The Minrir continued reaping his bloody harvest amongst the raiders, wading into their close-packed ranks until all I could see of him was the occasional flash of his black-bladed sword amongst the reddish mist and cloud of severed limbs that surrounded him. And then Moose arrived, hitting the disordered Surtrani ranks like an insane demon-possessed equine cyclone, which is pretty much what he was. He lashed out with his front hooves, caving in one man's head and knocking another into the water without most of his lower jaw. Then he danced back from the wild swing of an axe and grabbed that raider's arm with his teeth, then flung him into the water as well. At this point, between Moose and Kells, there were so many bubbles rising to the surface around the docks that the maid looked like some sort of odd boiling Surtrani Reaver soup. And just when it looked like things couldn't get any worse for the now rather bedraggled Surtrani, the garrison arrived and charged into the fray, swinging their weapons with wildly varying levels of skill and enthusiasm. I saw the two-headed rake wielder, a fine young gentleman named Yeth, slice a Surtrani's throat and then hook another by the cheek and lead him right into one of Moose's lashing hooves, with predictable results. Even old Barstow got into the act, cackling with glee as he plunged his spear into a raider's back. I saw that Kells had managed to dance her way through the throng and gotten aboard the longship, where she was enthusiastically choking the one-eyed ruffian who had so unwisely started this mess. I also noticed there was another Surtrani aiming a spear at her back, so I shot him in the face with my crossbow, which had, up to this point, been uselessly dangling by my hand. All in all, things seemed to be going passably well, for us at least. As I started the arduous process of reloading my crossbow, I heard Thera bellow from the doorway of her tavern. "Oh, Caldorian, does this mean we're not paying tribute to the Surtrani anymore?" "Yep," I shouted back, grunting with effort as I cranked back the string. "There were a series of miscommunications, and I'll admit that I made some unfortunate comments about their attire. So, negotiations have broken down, and it doesn't appear that Derren's scheme is workable anymore." "Understood. We're discontinuing the tribute plan," she said. She turned to the townsfolk, who were now starting to cluster in their respective doorways, and roared, "Right then, everybody listen up. The Caldorian borked up the negotiation, so from now on we're fighting the Surtrani rather than paying them. Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions?" Dead silence. "Okay, let's get to it. I don't want a single one of these scum-loving freeloaders left alive to soil our pristine shores. You have 10 minutes. And with that, the good citizens of Lamb's Rebuke boiled out of their homes and businesses armed with axes, hammers, and various repurposed home improvement tools, and they fell on the sadly diminished Surtrani raiders with a brisk efficiency that I found quite exhilarating. In a few short minutes, the last of the raiders has been disposed of, ending the first battle in what came to be known as the Great Northern Miscommunication. The townsfolk quickly began stripping the dead of their armor, weapons, and any other valuables, while Minrir, splattered head to foot in blood and other bodily fluids, stood morosely on the docks, leaning on a reasoned response and breathing heavily. Kells walked up to me, gracefully avoiding the puddles of gore and various unattached body parts, and handed me a bloody bolt. "Here's your toy back," she said, "and thank you for shooting that nice man in the face." You're welcome, Kells," I replied, trying to surreptitiously wipe the blood off it on my armor. "And thanks for, choking all those people and drowning them. Stuff like that." "Not a problem," she said cheerily. "It was fun, and I really liked watching them try to swim." She glanced up. "Will you look at that? What pretty birdies!" And she skipped over to where a flock of buzzards had landed and was noisily fighting over the various bits and bobs of disarticulated Surtrani, which were now scattered up and down the beach. Moose wandered by, an arm in his mouth, and the surviving garrison clustered by the inn, looking rather startled that they had A, actually charged the Surtrani, and B, some of them had even survived to tell the tale. But unfortunately, Barstow and two of his comrades were among them. I looked around the battlefield and nodded in satisfaction. "Well, I suppose that went rather well, all things considered, and despite the ruckus at the end. More will come, Thera said as she walked by, vigorously scouring Surtrani brains off of her frying pan. They're notoriously dim that way. I'd say we've probably got a week at most before we have to do this all over again. Great, I muttered, running my hand through my rapidly thinning hair. Just what I need, a damn war. I sighed, and with that, I trudged down the beach and began helping the townsfolk fish bodies out of the bay. After the sheepish tidied up the battlefield and moved the now empty longship to another dock, I sent the remaining garrison back to the fortress and retired to the inn to convene a meeting of the ruling council of Sheepland, which included myself, of course, Minrir, Thera, and sometimes Kells, depending on if she was interested or not, which turned out to be most often not, as it turned out. I guess we can expect more Surtrani, I said, so it would be useful if we actually had a workable plan this time around. Agreed, Minrir grunted. Now, I know they'll probably only send a few ships at a time for the next few weeks, but at some point, a major raiding fleet will arrive, which will probably include up to 30 longships and over 1,000 raiders. They'll all be angry and looking for blood. Outstanding, I wearily replied. This is just the sort of thing that we need to needlessly complicate our lives. So, what sorts of resources can we bring to bear? I can send a messenger south to request reinforcements, but given what the king thinks of me, I don't think we can rely on him. I'll also send somebody to the lowlands and to Aldercore just in case either one of them wants to send help. But even then, it'll be weeks before they arrive, if they arrive at all. So we need to plan on fighting with just the resources we have here on hand. I don't know, maybe we should flee inland and abandon the town or something. Thera frowned at me. There will be no abandoning the town, Caldorian. If you don't want to pay tribute, we fight. And honestly, we could use the ships and metal they're so thoughtfully bringing with them. It will help out with some of our long-term development plans for the town. Now, stop that foolishness. Here's what I've come up with. She reached under the table and pulled out a large lambskin scroll, which she unrolled. It was a well-drawn and detailed map of the town. So we can fortify the harbor entrance here and here, she began, pointing on the map. And we should have enough iron between what we've already got on hand and what we've looted from the Surtrani bodies to forge a chain long enough to block the bay. We've got a shipment of sheep oil that went bad last year that I have an idea for. And with that, we spent the rest of the day hammering out a workable plan to defeat the Surtrani. I only hoped we had enough time to put it in place before the next band arrived. As it turned out, we had 3 days. So that's that chapter. There's a couple things. So first off, with neck tattoos, I've always been kind of fascinated by them. Because even people that have tattoos are heavily tattooed will not, a lot of people won't get neck tattoos because I guess it's just one step too far. It's like I don't know, maybe a class thing, like only like people that are concerned about like fitting in with society at all in any way, shape, or form will get them. In fact, I worked with a guy who had full sleeves on, tattoo sleeves on both of his arms, chest, legs, and he absolutely refused to get a neck tattoo. So it was kind of low class. And I guess I can understand that because even if you've got like full sleeves, tattoo sleeves on each arm, you can always just put a shirt on and conceal them if you need to get an office job. But with a neck tattoo, if you've got something like there's no I in team tattooed all across your neck, there's not going to be too many ways that you can easily conceal that. Unless you get like a, I don't know, turtleneck, try to, pull off some sort of beatnik vibe with a beret and a turtleneck or something like that. But it's always been kind of interesting. That's that one step too far, even with people that are heavily tattooed. The other thing that struck me is this thing going by is the whole thing about heavy armor in water. Now I know Vikings in real life, a lot of times they would wear chain mail and heavier armor. because they weren't fighting on ships most of the time. So it makes sense. They'd land and they'd troop inland, which I didn't actually consider when I wrote this the first time. And also even the Romans, when they were fighting the Carthaginians, they had a few of their Marines would be like full legionnaire getup, which it's going to be extremely difficult to swim in, I would imagine. But they did that because basically, at least initially, they were, their strategy involved like getting everybody's ships tied together, and then they could just swarm over and massacre the Carthaginian sailors, and kind of turn a sea battle into a land battle in some sort of weird ways. But despite all that, I do have to wonder why humans in general, as much time as we spent fighting on oceans in the ancient, at least around the Mediterranean, which is what I'm sort of familiar with, they didn't actually come up with some sort of more buoyant armor. I just always think that would have been a handy thing to get in to invent at some point. And also, I mean, you hear, I don't know, this is just tangentially related. You hear, like, I don't know, in the Middle Ages and stuff like that, how sailors a lot of times didn't know how to swim. And I'm sorry, man, if you're sailing on the ocean, I mean, wouldn't that be the first thing that you would, I don't know, learn how to do? Maybe it wouldn't make any difference, I guess, if you're in the middle of the Atlantic or something like that. But I mean, for God's sakes, if you're just fighting like 100 feet offshore, learn to swim for God's sakes. And maybe they did. Maybe we just don't hear about them. Maybe we only hear about the people that couldn't swim that ended up drowning. I don't know. Anyway, just random thoughts on that. So the Surtrani have arrived. Next chapter, which again I'll do it in a couple days. They're gonna run into another band, and then we'll get into one of my major battles that we get into. Can't remember if that's next chapter or the chapter after that. But yeah, I'll do that in a couple days, and I hope you enjoyed this.